Good morning, everybody. Welcome, herzlich willkommen to our webinar, Open for Business, Life Science and Engineering, Austria and Ireland. I'm happy to welcome today 62 companies, both from Ireland and Austria. We have like a ratio of perfectly 50%, and very much looking forward to spending the next 45-50 minutes with you. My name is Joseph Tremmel. I'm the Austrian Commercial Counselor to Ireland and also head of Advantage Austria. I live and work in Ireland during the last 3 years, unfortunately hit by the pandemic 1.5 years. And thank God, last weekend was my first time out of Dublin, and we took the chance to go to Iron Islands, which was really, really beautiful. What are we doing? Advantage Austria is the Austrian Enterprise Island. So we help Austrian companies find Irish partners and work to further the economic exchange between our two countries. During the last year, like so many, pandemic and Brexit were two of the top priorities of my office. And among these discussions I had with Austrian companies mainly was topics how to take care of the Irish market in a new way post-Brexit, because many of the larger Austrian companies, especially, they were taking care of the Irish market from the UK. And the question was, so how do we assess Ireland, or how do we serve Irish customers in the future? And there was quite some Austrian companies that decided, okay, the Irish market is, or Irish customers, there is sufficient Irish customers that would allow for an all-own like sales teams in Ireland. And we will hear of one of these companies today, where Cachal Finch of Tyrolit will tell us how they came to this decision and how he's now serving Irish customers directly from Enniskerry here in right south of Dublin. Talking about mitigating supply chains, mitigating risks, we thought, okay, this is a topic that is really relevant for both the Irish companies, but also the Austrians who want to give first-class, world-class customer service. And there we met up with Ibec and found like a really common interest. And that's how we started to talk about this webinar and also our supply chain event later on in September. And that's already from my side. Thanks a lot to Ibec. Thank you very much to the Life Science Austria in Vienna and the Human Technology Cluster in Styria, who helped us promote the event in Austria. And now I'm happy to hand over to my colleague Connor, who really pulled everything together from our side. Thank you, Connor. And the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining, and we're delighted to have so many great companies here with us today. My name's Connor. I work here in Advantage Austria in Dublin with Joseph. So in case anyone isn't familiar from the Austrian side with Ireland or the Irish side with Austria, here is just a brief comparison between the two. As you can see, Austria is a little bit bigger in terms of landmass and population. Austria was hit hard during COVID-19 in terms of GDP. In case any Austrians are looking open-mouthed at the Irish growth during COVID-19, that growth is actually in part due to Ireland's fantastic life science and engineering sector. I mean, one of the reasons why we're here today is Ireland has such a first world-class life science sector. Thankfully, GDP growth forecast for 2021 is strong for both countries, according to the European Commission. And here is just a little comparison between healthcare expenditure as a percentage of GDP from both countries. Austria a little bit higher than Ireland. And as I mentioned, for such a small country, really comparatively, Ireland has an amazing life science sector with more than 64,000 people employed here. Austria a little bit less and a little bit less investment, but Austria has an incredibly strong manufacturing base, which you'll hear about later. And the life science sector and their very young MedTech sector is growing at a rapid pace. So we're very excited about that. And this is what it's all about. This is why I'm here today, to ask you to save the date for the 15th of September. Pre-COVID, we have done many economic trade missions where we would bring groups of Austrian companies to Ireland for meetings with the multinationals and the Irish MedTech, pharma and life science companies here. And this has been changed now this year into digital formats. So we are planning a digital supplier days, life science and engineering for 2021. We're doing this with thanks to cooperation with Life Science Austria and the medical technology cluster, human technology Styria in Austria as well. And we'll be in touch about this. And what we want to do is marry Austrian companies and Irish companies that are looking for trade opportunities within the Eurozone with a fellow EU member, and also maybe diversification post-Brexit with someone who is also still within EU regulations. So we're very hopeful for that. And we really see a lot of possibility for this. I'll be introducing Pat in a moment, and he will speak about the broader picture about supply chains in general. Cathal will speak about the success story of an Austrian company that diversified into Ireland after Brexit. And we think that the possibilities that Austria has with its varied manufacturing, engineering, and life science base throughout the country, as well as the innovation and the fantastic life science sector here in Ireland. This is just one city, a list of life science companies in one small city, Galway, on the coast of Ireland. Lovely to visit. We were there in 2017, I think was the last time, on a trade mission with Austrian companies. And we think there are partnerships to be had. We really do. You know, Austria had a small biotech firm that's been part of the coronavirus vaccine. And we think that there are future possibilities on both sides, both for the Irish and the Austrian side. So thank you for listening to me. I won't take up any more of your time. We'll get on to the experts. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Pat Ivory from Ibec, and special thanks to Pat and to Ibec for making this webinar a possibility. Thank you, Pat.
Good morning, Conor and Joseph, and good morning to everybody on the webinar. Very pleased to be here this morning. I'd like to talk to you a bit about trade and supply chains, and to give you a view of what is happening both within the European Union and globally on this particular issue. First of all, Ibec and supply chains in many companies in Ireland and across Europe are part of global supply chains. I mean, if you think of the different sectors in Ireland, the pharmaceutical sector, the medical technology sector, and even the ICT sectors, there's a huge amount of global supply chains and being part of those global supply chains. And then we must be able to maintain global competitiveness. And this is one of the reasons that supply chains must be secure, but also diverse. The European Commission work on identifying strategic dependencies as a result of the experience of COVID, and also with Brexit taking place this year and being implemented this year. So there's been, particularly in the most sensitive industrial ecosystems, such as health, there's been an aim to provide for a solid basis for defining the necessary policy responses and engagement with business. So our view is that trade in goods and services are inextricably linked or connected with these global supply chains, and they can play a really key role in the recovery of our economies and improving the EU's resilience and getting Ireland back to where it was before the COVID crisis. But as you've heard, the growth rates in Ireland have been very good, even over the last 18 months. The EU has had a focus on strengthening its supply chains, strengthening the resilience of them, the sustainability of the EU economy, and it sees supply chains as being a pillar of the EU to drive forward a new concept which is being developed called open strategic autonomy. EU solutions include crisis preparedness for the COVID pandemic has really heightened that awareness, diversifying production and supply chains, and ensuring strategic stockpiling, as well as fostering production and investment in neighbouring countries. One of whom, for Ireland, of course, is the UK, which is now outside the European Union. COVID-19 has caused disruption in global value chains, and these disruptions underscore the importance of global collaboration and multilateralism, and I will talk about that presently. And one of the heightened areas has been essential goods and services such as medical technology and healthcare. And we're all acutely aware of that, given the last year and 18 months we've all experienced. The OECD, I am chair of the business at the OECD Trade Committee, and we do a lot of work with the OECD in Ibec, both on taxation issues, on trade issues, and on increasingly on environment and global value chain issues. And building resilience in global value chains has been a focus of the OECD. They talk about a no-risk-free environment. The challenge is to build resilience to those risks and to those shocks which will take place on a continual basis, and notably in supply chains for essential goods over the last year or so. The private sector is recognised as playing a key role in managing risks in global supply chains, but governments also have a role to play, and an important role, and can have a range of tools at their disposal to promote resilience. But it's important that government cannot replace the role of the private sector in the delivery of supply chains. Of course, there is a need to work with the private sector, such as to promote transparency and beneficial supply chains, and through resilient, responsible business conduct, and following the rules and making sure that you're fully compliant with all the rules that are there. Others are no-regret investments and reforms that can be undertaken domestically, such as investment in critical infrastructure, your ports infrastructure, your digital infrastructure. Increasingly, there's a huge focus on digital to drive forward all of our economies, and also on trade facilitation. And even in the trade facilitation area, digital is now a big factor, with most completion of customs forms online these days. Building resilience in global supply chains is also, there are several measures targeted specifically at the provision of essential goods, notably in the times of crisis such as this last year or so. And other measures can range from stress tests or addressing concentration and bottlenecks in supply chains. So you're looking at how supply chains actually work and learning more about how supply chains operate and adapting then to that. All the approaches come with costs and benefits, and governments have a range of options with varying contexts and trade-offs. So one consistent message is that resilient global supply chains require cooperation. The public and the private sector, governments and citizens across countries actually working together. And this is something that we have really lobbied for within the OECD, that this collaboration and cooperation is fully recognized. And it's cooperation both in building and also building trust among the different players in a supply chain, the different governments, the private sector, and the governments, and the transparency. And this is a first critical step. At business at the OECD, we have come up with a number of recommendations for governments around building these resilient supply chains. We need to work towards a common understanding of the essentials. You know, what are we going to deliver and how are we going to deliver it? And regulatory mutual recognition and harmonization of standards is one way of doing that. We also need to facilitate procedures and ensure transparency at the border. So here you need to work and review the transport and logistics and border process regulations that you have. You need to keep cargo and transport moving, even when you have very difficult situations and shocks, such as COVID, which came on us in March 2020, and really was a huge shock to our transport systems, to our logistics systems, but also more measured shocks, such as, for example, the UK leaving the European Union, and what that has meant for trade between the EU and the UK, between Ireland and the UK, and between the UK and Northern Ireland. And how do you manage that particular process? You need to safeguard the movement of people and services and mobility as well. And sometimes this is forgotten. you cannot run an efficient supply chain without movement of people. And the movement of international business people and service mobility should remain as free and as predictable as possible with the necessary safeguards. And this is one area where we need international travel to get going again. We need to have these digital certificates to enable us to travel, to enable people to keep in contact with their customers and to manage their particular businesses across different borders. We also need, I think, arrangements in FTAs, free trade agreements, to enable services to be provided across borders. And this is something which will be an increasingly challenging position with the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Further recommendations for government are to reduce heterogeneity of technical standards and unnecessary non-tariff barriers. So in other words, work on recognizing our domestic regulatory requirements, what the essentials are to reduce the cost and speed up the processes without compromising the standards. We all accept that we need to have very high standards, and particularly if you're moving anything in relation to human health and safety, such as pharmaceuticals or medical technology, then you need absolutely to ensure that your products are safe. And even in areas like engineering, you need to ensure that whatever machines or whatever manufacturing process you install, you're able to get to them, to service them, to make sure that they run according to their specifications. You need to keep national security exemptions narrowly focused and based on well-defined criteria. And this has been a problem where governments sometimes tend to use catch-all phrases to introduce non-tariff barriers. And we need to ensure that they are only, for security reasons, they're only introduced where there is an actual security risk. So we caution against overly expansive or vague investment screening or the introduction of national security tariffs that could be used as a guide for protectionism or improper instruments in trade negotiation. We also need to encourage investment in trade and infrastructure. And this is a critical factor to ensure that companies, and particularly the logistics sectors, can have those alternate means of transport. They can minimize the bottlenecks and move the products that their customers need in a timely fashion and in an efficient fashion. So that encouragement in infrastructure, we need to work with governments to make sure that the port infrastructure is fully fit for purpose. We need to ensure that the digital infrastructure that's built around customs and trade between the revenue commissioners here in Ireland and the logistics companies is fully understood, that the systems work on both sides. We've seen this in Brexit, that there have been challenges to the new systems on the import side that have been introduced also as the Union Customs Code. And you need to be able to have very good working relationship and collaboration between the authorities and business to sort out problems on a day-to-day basis. We need to promote digitalization, digital trade and e-commerce. And increasingly, trade is becoming digitalized. I was on a meeting only yesterday talking about the digitalization of health certs for trade between the UK and the EU to ensure that those regulations can actually take place and that product can actually move smoothly. Enabling regulations on e-payments, e-contracts, e-signatures can help business adapt faster, improve their e-governance and reduce the administrative burden. And essentially, one of the key things too within implementing both free trade agreements and ensuring that global supply chains work efficiently is to give support to SMEs. Because for every global value chain and for every global supply chain, there's a mixture of multinational companies and the SMEs who provide a whole range of services to those multinational companies. So encouraging SMEs to look at how they can market diversify, also in relation to developing their own businesses, not relying on one customer or one region too heavily, but to diversify, to access digital infrastructure and technology, to have the resources to do that and support them through agencies like Enterprise Ireland, like Advantage Austria, to work with SMEs and develop on-the-ground mentors and business development managers to help them maintain and strengthen and diversify their export suppliers, their producers, and their export market opportunities. And the role of business working very closely with state agencies like Enterprise Ireland and Advantage Austria should not be underestimated. That's a really critical and important role. We should also closely consult with the private sector and relevant stakeholders. Inclusive, predictable, transparent, and evidence-based stakeholder engagement in the processes is what's needed more than ever if we're going to meet the challenges that face us both currently and in the years ahead. Finally, I'd like to maybe just say that in the last couple of months, the B7, the Business 7, which makes recommendations to the G7 countries, of which, as you know, all of the big countries, the EU is part of this, the UK is also part of it, the United States, etc. And one of the key messages that the Business 7 is giving to this group is that we need to roll back protectionist measures that have crept in recent years. We need to adapt the pandemic, including the export restrictions over the next 12 months, and we need to commit to prioritizing open global supply chains over restrictions. So we need to ensure that if measures were introduced to address a crisis, that as the crisis is unwound, as we return to normal business, that those measures are removed. We also need to enhance cooperation through a multi-stakeholder approach to achieve that open, transparent, and consensus international system of international regulation standards and rules and norms. And here's where you have the role of working with the OECD, working with the WTO, the World Trade Organization. They will have a ministerial conference later this year in November. We need to ensure that all of these multilateral groups actually support and provide evidence for governments to make correct and proper decisions and to work collaboratively with the private sector. We need to lead on agreed cross-economy net zero targets. So this is climate change and decarbonisation of power generation, etc. The setting of very, very targeted, ambitious targets. They should be to phase out coal, for example, in power generation. These are big, big changes, but we need to ensure that there is agreed ways to do this. The easy part is setting the targets. The more difficult part is actually delivering on those targets. And you need cooperation between business and government to actually do that. And you need to establish greater cooperation on the next generation of regulatory frameworks, governing, for example, emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence. So these are the key messages that business have put to the B7. We'll also have similar messages for the WTO in November. And we'll continue to work with the OECD, with the European Union, with our own government here in Ireland, and with you as partners in Austria and in Ireland to see how can we actually develop and improve our supply chains and what opportunities are there going to be for companies within that to build up closer relationships and maybe build up new paths to market. So thanks very much indeed, Conor and Joseph, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat. That was excellent. And I really liked your thoughts on building resilience. I think that could have been an alternate title for this event as well, because we want to know more about resilience in the supply chain. So thank you. Just before the next speaker, I'll just introduce him, Cathal Finch from Tyrolit. We're delighted to have an Austrian company of Tyrolit standing here in Ireland now with an office, and Cathal is leading that office. In medtech and engineering, there have always been Austrian companies present in Ireland doing projects. I'm from Limerick, and if anyone has driven through the Limerick Tunnel, you can thank an Austrian company called Strabag for that. And we'll speak then after Cathal with a Q&A with myself, Cathal, and Pat. So without further ado, thank you, Cathal.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, thank you to Advantage Austria and Ibec for organising this. And secondly, if anyone has any questions, if they just let us know at the end, and I'll do my best to answer it. So we're just going to run through a little bit about who Tyrolit are. And then obviously what kind of medical device companies we're dealing with, and then go into, I suppose, why our customers like dealing directly with an Austrian or EU-based company. So Austria is 102 years old now. It's family owned, so most of you guys will be familiar with Swarovski and the little crystal figurines and jewellery. That's our parent company. And our Tyrolit is still owned by the Swarovski family. We're the largest bonded abrasive manufacturer in Europe, 29 production facilities around the world, and sales of just under 700 million in the last good year. So a little bit, I suppose you can see there, the headquarters is in Schwatz, which is in the Innsbruck Valley in Austria, and you can see the depth of production facilities and sales facilities that we have around the world. So I suppose a little bit about what we see as the life sciences industry in Ireland, and most of what we see from that applies to a lot of the manufacturing in general over here, which means it's high tech and high productivity. This means, I suppose, very productive facilities making very high cost items. So most of the manufacturing companies in Ireland are going to be based in the life science industry, whether that's pharmaceuticals or medical devices. That would be the largest part of the manufacturing base over here. There's a very good engineering mindset in Ireland, at least what we've encountered. You can see it in most of the companies that the engineers themselves are very good at pushing efficiencies through their processes. And I think some of that comes from the fact that it is a high cost area to do business. So that you need these efficiencies running through the companies. Ireland actually is one of the most efficient places in the world to manufacture. And I think this comes from the engineers themselves leading it. It also means that these suppliers are very open to people who can help drive those efficiencies. So a little bit about what we would see as our potential customers. This won't apply to all, obviously, Austrian companies trying to deal in the life sciences sector. But where we'd be targeting would be companies using mostly metals or ceramics to produce medical parts. They're going to be a mix of multinationals and indigenous Irish companies, and are going to be based mostly, I suppose, in the West Coast, Cork, Limerick, Galway. The main ones are things like orthopedic manufacturers, medical tooling, blades and needles, medical wire molding, and then the finishing of parts to give you the nice shiny effect that you see on a lot of medical devices. So a little bit about the products. Now, this obviously doesn't cover everything that we do, but you can see there some of the items that we would use and where they would be used. So everything from SCM, which would be what people would know as Scotch-Brite, for the finishing of products. You can see there's wheels there for hip grinding, knee grinding, more polishing wheels. We do wheels for grinding of dental tools. So if you've ever been to the dentist, you can blame us for the drills. And then things like belts, wheels for obviously larger medical tools, needle grinding, and then some that I haven't pictured for grinding a medical wire and for finishing. So how we set up the support network that we have is, I suppose, a little bit of a hangover from where we were. So I would have worked originally for the UK office. I lived in the UK for 7 years, and I've arrived back in Ireland now for a few years. So we would support, obviously, the Irish business with myself, who's worked in the industry for nearly 10 years now. We would have a medical engineer specifically in the UK who would support our business in the UK and Ireland. And then we have other engineers in the UK looking after different areas that would come over to help. And then obviously we have our support team in the headquarters. So Florian Derigel is our business development manager for the medical team. And then we have 2 medical engineers, and one of our diamond wheeled engineers looks after medical and some of our tooling customers as well. So that's how we're supporting things. So the level of support that we need to bring into companies depends on what works best and who exactly is needed for that particular customer. And again, it means having the support behind us from Austria means that we can, you know, how to say it, means we can support it quite easily. I suppose, you know, there's direct flights a lot of the time into Dublin, so it means the guys can be over pretty quickly. So I suppose when I was asked to do this, I had a chat with some of our customers to find out why they were looking at us, you know, what were the advantage of dealing with us. And some of the things they were saying are some of the things that were being discussed about having that reliability. And that comes from, I suppose, the mindset from Austria, and also obviously being in the EU. So because there is quite a good manufacturing base in Austria, there is a similar culture to the Irish manufacturers. In a whole, the industries themselves in the countries, stuff like finance, agribusiness, and high precision machining, are quite similar. And it means that the expertise is quite similar across the countries. They're both, I suppose, both countries are overshadowed by large economic neighbours. So for ourselves in Ireland, it's the UK. In Austria, it's Germany. And it means that our manufacturing, it has been shaped to pick up industries that need expertise and need very high quality to differentiate ourselves from some of the larger economies where the cost base can make a difference. And as I said, this means that the Austrian companies themselves are quite focused on the same things, the efficiencies through the process, to make sure that what they're making and what, you know, the customers that they're supplying into are able to make things in an efficient manner and, you know, to a very high precision. And a little bit then about the supply with Brexit. So the main thing for us, as someone who worked out of the UK office, the main thing for us was to make sure that our customers were looked after, that they could have a reliable supply, no interruption, and that the main thing would be that the least amount of paperwork was required for them. So if we're shipping in items weekly to customers, the last thing we need from them is to be filling out custom forms and reams of paperwork to get each delivery in. So what we did was we changed our delivery system. In the past, everything would have come through our UK warehouse. So we would get trucks from our manufacturing sites in the EU, brought into the UK, and then obviously split up and delivered from them. But what we did was we changed the system essentially so that the vast majority of our goods now come direct from the EU. Delivery wise, it doesn't make a difference, delivery times, because the delivery times to the UK and back out are very similar to delivery times direct from those sites. Obviously, it reduces the amount of paperwork for everyone involved, which is great. And as I said, there's no issues then with customs or with any kind of delays from that end of things. We still do invoices through the UK subsidiary, but as I said, the deliveries are sent out weekly from Austria. So it means that we've been able to actually pick up a lot of business in the last year to 18 months due to the fact that we have this reliable supply, whereas some of our competitors are still relying on a UK-based supply network. So it's actually been very good for us to arrange things that way, to kind of cut them out for Irish customers. So I think that's basically it. So my details are there. Apologies for the UK number. I'm still getting it changed. And I'll pass you back to Connor. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Cathal. That was great, and we were delighted to have someone who's actually been through the post-Brexit experience here talking with us today. So now we have time for a Q&A with both Pat and Cathal. Cathal is here with me, and Pat, if you'd like to turn on your camera. We've just had one question come in about from an Austrian company asking where would be the best place to go if they want to start exporting into Ireland. Where would they go for information or assistance? And that would actually be to us, the Dublin office of Advantage Austria Ireland. We're the Austrian Embassy commercial section. So Dublin at vko.at. And also one of the reasons we're here today is this September event where thankfully with the digital economy the way it is now, we can bring any number of companies together in this event on 15th of September, and not just medtech or pharma as we did previously in person in Galway. We've expanded it to life science and engineering. So we'll be in touch about that event as well. So just to get us started, Pat, you mentioned in your talk about building resilience, and then you spoke quite a bit about the global supply chain. You also mentioned protectionist measures. Do you think after Brexit and after we see maybe more protectionist measures, or at least talk of more protectionist measures during COVID-19, that a European partner within the EU, with a fellow EU company, can maybe bypass some of those problems and enable you to have those common standards and build your resilience? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, as Cathal outlined in his presentation, if you're moving goods within the European Union, you are, of course, avoiding customs procedures and the cost of customs procedures and the logistics around that. So the smoothest form of trade is going to be trade within the European single market. So I think that's a very important point. But of course, a country like Ireland and Austria, small, open economies, dynamic, they always want the ability to trade with a whole variety of partners, both inside and outside of the European Union. So we would hope that our trade relations with the United States are improving. With the Biden administration, we hope that the tariffs that grew up under the Trump administration will be removed under negotiations between the EU and the US, and that some of the protectionist measures and tariffs will be unwound. And they have impacted on the engineering sector as well. For example, tariffs on steel, which is supplied into the medical technology sector, and a whole range of food and drink products as well. So I think it's important to have the ability to trade both outside of the European Union and within the European Union. And I'm sure that, we will get to a stage where we will get beyond the implementation period of the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement and the withdrawal agreement, but that looks like it's a little bit off at the moment.
So after the scare of COVID-19, it'll go back to free trade, free global trade for everyone.
Yeah, well, I think it'll probably be different. It will be different. I think the experience of the pandemic will actually have an impact, and also the new emphasis on climate change will also mean that there will be more emphasis on sustainability, and that's something we're all going to have to take on board in trade terms.
Okay, thank you very much. And Cathal, I just have a question for you. You mentioned there about the ease of having Austria, the delivery times are similar. If you want to come into the camera, you can. The delivery times are similar. There's also now ease between UK customs and Irish customs. Is this an add-on that you're offering to customers, or do you feel that customers are actually looking for this from you? Is this something that they're seeking you out for, or is this just a kind of an add-on benefit that you can offer customers? What are your thoughts?
I suppose it's something we'd see as something we should be delivering customers. You know, like I said in the presentation, the last thing any of our customers want is the extra hassle of paperwork or delays or anything like that. And, you know, we would see ourselves as a partner to a lot of our customers. So the point of a partner is to make things easier, is to work with them. So we'd see it as we should be making their life as easy as possible, you know. So if that's done by, you know, needing to hold stock in Austria or air freight stuff over on short notice, or, you know, it's about, I suppose, being a partner. So doing that stuff without having to be asked, you know, that they want the direct line from Austria, doing it whatever way makes them easiest. You know, if we have, say, some customers, we do still supply some items out of the UK because we have large stocks, because certain items are used more, say, in the UK and Ireland. Stuff like imperial measurements would still be on a lot of the machines, whether they're British or American machines in Ireland, whereas obviously across Europe, they're mostly metric. So there is some items that we would hold in the UK for customers because they're specific to them. But otherwise, we would see that as being a partner, you know, a proper partner, you know, giving them the best, easiest way to access the products. So, yeah.
Yeah, and for all the Austrians listening, Ireland only switched over to metric in the early 2000s, I think. So I grew up in the 90s and I still think in miles sometimes. It's a bit confusing. But okay, so we do have time for, if anyone wants to turn on their camera and ask a question, we do have a few more minutes. Would anyone like to ask anything of Pat or of Cathal or of myself? Okay. Okay, then thank you. I just want to say thank you again to our partner Ibec for making this happen, for really getting such great Irish companies to attend this event. Thank you to Lisa Vienna and the WKO for getting such great Austrian companies here. We hope that there will be continued interest, and just on what we've discussed today with both Pat and Cathal, we think there are opportunities on both sides, and we hope there will be interest in our September event, which I'll be in touch about. So thank you to our speakers. Pat, Cathal, thank you very much for joining us. And looking forward to seeing everyone in person, hopefully soon. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Conor, Joseph, and Carl, and thanks for everybody for joining. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you. Have a good morning.